She did everything right. She left the relationship. She filed for divorce. She started rebuilding her life. By October 2023, Savannah Paschal was glowing again. She had a job she loved, friends who adored her, a future she was finally excited about. But what no one knew was that her ex-husband had been watching. He hadn't let go, he hadn't moved on. On a quiet Monday morning, Savannah didn't show up for work. She didn't answer her phone. Her car was still in the driveway. And when police entered her home, they found her inside the master bathroom, shot. This is the story of Savannah Paschal, a teacher, a sister, a friend, and the ex-husband who couldn't let her live without him. Savannah Paschal was just 30 years old. She lived in Oklahoma City, where she worked as a teacher for Mustang Public Schools, a district known for its strong sense of community. Her colleagues said she had a way of lighting up a room. Her students loved her. She wasn't just good at her job, she made people feel seen. She was outgoing, deeply compassionate, and the kind of person who showed up for others, even when she was quietly going through things of her own. Friends and family describe her as funny, thoughtful, and strong. She was close to her parents, her siblings, and she was especially loved within the school system. You couldn't mention her name in Mustang without hearing someone say, she had a heart that just didn't stop. But there was one part of Savannah's life that was more complicated. She had been married to Jared Paschal, a corrections officer. On paper, he was stable, professional, someone who wore a badge. But in private, the relationship had become controlling. Over time, Savannah pulled back. She grew quiet. She stopped talking about her marriage. And by early 2023, she had made a decision, a big one. She filed for divorce. According to her loved ones, it wasn't a decision she made lightly. There had been emotional tension, isolation, control. But she stayed calm. She handled things legally. She did what women are told to do when they're ready to leave a dangerous situation. And by the fall of 2023, Savannah was doing better. Her friends said she was smiling more, laughing, making plans again. She was reclaiming her life, quietly, peacefully, and with hope. But what no one knew was that Jared had been watching, waiting, and planning something that Savannah, and no one around her, could have ever prepared for. Monday, October 30th, 2023, began like any other day. Savannah Paschal was expected at work that morning. She taught in the Mustang Public School District, where she was known for being punctual, dedicated, and deeply committed to her students. She never missed a day without a reason. She always showed up. She always let someone know if she needed time off. That's just the kind of person she was. But that morning, she didn't show up, and she didn't call in. At first, it may have seemed like a simple oversight, a late start, a missed alarm. But when her phone stayed quiet and she didn't respond to messages from colleagues and family, worry began to grow. By the afternoon, her parents were alarmed. They hadn't heard from her. She wasn't answering their calls. And when they stopped by her house in southwest Oklahoma City, they found something that didn't sit right. Her car was parked outside. The house looked exactly as it always did. There was no answer at the door. That's when they called police. Officers arrived shortly after and conducted a welfare check. At this point, Savannah hadn't been seen or heard from in nearly a full day. Police entered the home around 1 p.m., and everything seemed still, quiet, nothing out of place at first. Her phone was still inside the house, her purse, her belongings. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle in the living room or hallway, just silence. But then, officers made their way to the master bathroom, and that's where they found Savannah. She was on the floor, lifeless. She had been shot. Officers secured the scene immediately. Emergency services confirmed that Savannah was pronounced dead at the scene. The bathroom became the epicenter of the investigation, and within hours, her death was classified as a homicide. The timeline didn't make sense. Savannah hadn't been in a relationship. She wasn't in contact with anyone dangerous, as far as anyone knew. She lived alone. She kept to herself. The only person who might have had reason to hurt her was the one she had already left behind. And as detectives began contacting her inner circle, one name came up again and again: Savannah Paschal, her ex-husband, the man she had legally separated from, the one she had escaped. And as it turned out, Jared was nowhere to be found. When news of Savannah's death reached her family and the school district, the first reaction was shock. But the second was suspicion, and it was immediate. Everyone had the same name in their minds: Savannah Paschal, Savannah's ex-husband, a man with law enforcement training who worked as a corrections officer, a man who knew how to avoid detection and how to plan around police procedures, a man she had finally left. The divorce hadn't been finalized, but Savannah had already taken the brave step to move on. She had her own space, her own life. She was surrounded by friends who supported her decision to leave. But as investigators began piecing together her final hours, it became increasingly clear that Jared hadn't let go. At the time of the welfare check, Jared was nowhere to be found. His phone was off. He hadn't shown up for work. His vehicle was missing. And most telling of all, he hadn't contacted a single member of Savannah's family since her death. Police began searching for him immediately. Bolos, beyond the lookout notices, were issued. Law enforcement scanned traffic cameras and local surveillance systems in Oklahoma City and surrounding counties. They suspected he might be on the run, or worse, preparing to harm someone else. But they wouldn't need to search long. Just hours after Savannah's body was discovered, Savannah Paschal's vehicle was located. It was parked just a short distance away, far enough to suggest he was trying to avoid being seen, but close enough to confirm what detectives had feared. Inside the car, officers made a second devastating discovery. Jared was dead. He had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It was a textbook murder-suicide. He had entered Savannah's home, waited, and taken her life. Then, with no intention of facing justice, he ended his own. In that moment, the investigation shifted from an active manhunt to a forensic reconstruction. The question was no longer who did this. It was, how long had he been planning it? And could anyone have seen it coming? Savannah's family was left to process not only the loss of their daughter, but the cruel reality that the man who took her had planned to get away with it. Not in court, but by leaving a trail of destruction behind and walking away from all accountability. The news of Savannah Paschal's death sent a wave of grief across Oklahoma City. At Mustang Public Schools, where Savannah worked, the impact was immediate and devastating. Students, teachers, and staff who had seen her smiling face just days earlier were suddenly faced with unthinkable loss. The district released a statement mourning the loss of a beloved member of our Mustang family and brought in grief counselors to help staff and students begin to process what had happened. In the days that followed, Savannah's friends, colleagues, and former students flooded social media with stories about how she stayed after class to help kids who were struggling, about how she decorated her room for holidays, made every child feel seen, and always wore a smile. Her death wasn't just a headline, it was deeply personal for everyone who knew her. And while the community grieved, her family was shattered. They had seen Savannah grow stronger in recent months. They had watched her reclaim her life after ending a relationship that had become suffocating. She had seemed lighter, happier, ready to move forward. But what they hadn't seen, what no one had, was the danger that followed her even after she walked away. Her parents, siblings, and close friends were left with 1,000 unanswered questions. How had Jared entered the home? Had he been stalking her? Did she know she was being watched? Investigators believe Jared may have used his corrections training to surveil Savannah or plan the attack carefully. There were no signs of forced entry, leading some to wonder if he still had a key or if he had waited until she was alone and vulnerable. But the most heartbreaking truth was this: Savannah had done everything she was supposed to. She left. She got distance. She restarted her life. And still, it wasn't enough. As the shock wore off, anger began to grow. Friends and advocates pointed out that Savannah's story wasn't just a tragedy, it was a pattern. A brutal reminder that leaving a controlling relationship is often the most dangerous time for a woman. That even when women do everything right, they still aren't always safe. Savannah's family has remained relatively private, but those closest to her have begun speaking out, not just to honor her memory, but to raise awareness about the warning signs of emotional abuse, coercive control, and how even people with law enforcement training can weaponize that power behind closed doors. Savannah's death wasn't just a loss, it was a failure of silence, and those who knew her are determined to make sure her name means something. After Savannah's death, her name became more than a headline. It became a symbol, not just for the tragedy of her story, but for the quiet, hidden danger that so many people live with behind closed doors. Savannah had followed every step society tells women to take when they want to leave a relationship safely. She filed for divorce. She moved forward with her life. She didn't escalate or fight publicly. She didn't drag his name through the mud. She simply walked away. And yet, she was still killed. Not in a moment of passion, not in an argument, but in premeditated silence, in her own home, by someone she once trusted. Her death is part of a larger story, a story of how control doesn't always come with bruises, and how violence doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's quiet, calculated, and it strikes just when a woman begins to feel free. Savannah's community hasn't let her memory fade. Teachers from Mustang Public Schools shared tributes. Friends gathered for vigils and fundraisers. Online, people across the country began posting her name, not just in mourning, but in solidarity. Because Savannah is far from alone, and her story deserves to be told not just for what happened, but for the thousands of women who are still trying to leave, still living in fear, still hoping they'll make it out and survive long enough to start over. Savannah Paschal did everything she could to live. She loved her job. She loved her people. She chose to leave a life that no longer made her feel safe. And in doing so, she made the most powerful choice a person can make. She chose herself. But her ex-husband made sure that choice would be her last. If Savannah's story stayed with you, let us know in the comments. And if you or someone you know is trying to leave a controlling relationship, reach out. You are not alone. Subscribe for more real stories, and click here to watch the next case.